Thank you. Last sessions of the afternoon. Thank you for sticking around, and I hope you'll go to the reception as well. To lead off this last section, we'll hear a little bit about using HTML5 on some non-modern browsers. Rey Bango is a technology evangelist at Microsoft. He's on the jQuery team, and he's an author for .NET Magazine. Please welcome Rey Bango. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. This is impressive. I'm actually very, very intimidated right now. So, no, bear with me. I'm a little nervous because this is a great crowd. I've seen the energy so far. I've seen a couple presentations, and you guys are amazing. I am going to talk about HTML5, polyfills, and shims. We know a lot about HTML5, but I think there's some things that we need to talk about when it comes to supporting non-modern browsers, and that's where these technologies come in. A little bit about me. I am a member of the jQuery project team. I also work for Microsoft Corporation. Woo! Yeah? All right. Woo, woo. No? OK. Come on, guys. I'm a technology evangelist for Microsoft. Recently joined the technology evangelist team, and I'm really excited about that because it gives me an opportunity to talk about some of the new technologies that were coming out, and that gets me pumped up. Again, member of the jQuery project team, and I've been an open source advocate as well for some time, so have a very different and varied perspective from a lot of different people, and it's great so far. I'm also a JavaScript and HTML5 fanboy. So, I'm not going to talk to you about HTML5 specifically. I think most everybody in this room is very familiar with HTML5. We know what it is. We know it's the newest version of HTML, and it's supported by all the major modern browsers. And that makes a lot of sense. This is the way that it's going to lead the future. Everybody's excited about it. The feature sets are amazing. And there's a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff is going to happen. And apart from that, it has a really snazzy new logo. It's kind of cool. You can put T-shirts on it. Philippe, can you stand up for me for a second? Stand up, stand up. All right, look at that shirt. That is a cool shirt. I love it. Who loves that shirt? All right. Yes. And I have to say the efforts of the W3C to get this HTML5 pushed forward and some of these new features in place is really exciting, and I'm grateful to them for taking the lead and making that strong push in getting us the technologies we need to push the web forward as well. But we have kind of this little break in our path. We have this great path that we want to take. We want to get to HTML5. We want to build these exciting websites, and we want to make things really, really shine and light up. But we have this kind of, gap in the middle. And the gap is really the non-modern browsers. All right, and the non-modern browsers. And when I talk about that, I'm sure we're all familiar. We're talking about non-modern browsers like IE6, 7, maybe older versions of Firefox, older versions of Chrome. Those are the ones that we still need to support in some fashion. And so I'm hoping that through this presentation, we're going to talk about some of the issues that surround HTML5 today, including browser fragmentation and feature support levels. And also, I want to answer some of the important questions, like what's feature detection? What is that? How do you do that? What are polyfills and shims, and how are they going to make it easier for us to use HTML5 today while still supporting users who aren't up to speed on the latest and greatest technology? And I also hope that at the end of the day, I'm going to provide you with solutions to these issues so that you can go and you can cross that little gap in there. You can actually go ahead and end up in HTML5 nirvana. All right, that's what I'm hoping that this session will provide to you guys. But the biggest problem we have right now is browser support. And yes, non-modern browsers exist. How many of you guys today have to support non-modern browsers? OK, the majority of you. OK, who doesn't? I envy you. That one person over there, I envy you so much. All right, if you don't have to support non-modern browsers, that's great. But I think the majority of web developers today have to consider it in some fashion. And if you look at this, and I actually went to a site called Can I Use? And I'd actually like to switch over to my laptop for a second so we can look at this. I went to a site called Can I Use? And Can I Use is great. Because here, I can actually see which browsers support which features. And from there, I kind of gleaned what support was available and what I would consider a non-modern browser. And so if you look through here, how many of you guys have seen Can I Use? Great. A lot of you guys probably use it day to day. And this is a great website. And I bring it up so that way the people out in the audience, the people out on the web know about it and actually can look at this as a great resource to kind of figure out what can be supported specifically today. Let's go back to our slides. So based on that information, I did glean that we have some browsers that need a little bit of help to get us to that HTML5 side, and that's things like IE6 through 8, Firefox 3.6, Safari 4.0, and even some modern browsers have issues because we're iterating and we're upgrading and updating at such a fast pace nowadays that you could have multiple versions of a browser, each with their own varying level of support for specific features. We see this all the time. There could be a version today, I'm going to say of, I don't know, I think today was Chrome 17. Well, that means that Chrome 15 has a varying level of support from what Chrome 17 has today. Firefox is on that same fast pace. Firefox 3.6 has a certain level of support. Well, we're on Firefox 8 as of today. So now we have multiple browsers that we have to consider and multiple browser versions that we have to consider. So we're having a lot of browser fragmentation. And what I did was I went over to a site called Net Market Share and I said, all right, I want to look to see what the latest browser stats were. What are the stats that we're dealing with? And if you look at the slide, can everybody see that? I'm going to look at it here, okay? Because this is my screen. So I'm looking and I see, all right, Internet Explorer 8 has, like 29% market share. That's pretty good. And then we have like Firefox 5.0, which has like 3.12. And then we have like Chrome 10.0, which has 0.24, and all these different variations. And you might be saying, well, Ray, big deal. What's 0.24% market share? Well, this is the whole entire internet. Do you think that 0.24% is 10 users? Probably not, right? Well, what if it's millions of users? And what if you're building a website? And what if that website now lost millions of users because you couldn't offer support for this non-modern browser? Is that fair to your users? Is that fair to the users that have become dependent on your services? Do you want your users to be happy? Well, in some cases, you may say, forget about it. I don't need to worry about this. And that one guy over there, he could say, I don't have to worry about this. But I think the majority of us have to consider that because it's important to support users and make sure they have a decent experience. Now notice I'm saying decent experience. I'm not saying they have to have the same experience across the board. And this is a very important distinction. You don't have to have the same experience, but you have to have some level of decent experience. And we'll talk about that a little later on. But with the fragmentation, again, we have varying levels of support for different features across browsers, but also across browser versions. And it becomes a real drag to try to figure out what am I dealing with, which browser version supports what. All right? And so we have to consider that. And a lot of people would do browser detection. Who's done browser detection in the past? And who's had code that broke because of browser detection? Great. OK, perfect. And so browser detection, it's a flawed concept. It made a lot of sense way back in the day, but now it's just you're making fixes based on assumptions that features are going to exist, and that's just a flawed assumption. We can't go that route. So what are the solutions? Well, the first one is feature detection. All right, you want to act based on what features are there. The cool thing about what's going on with the standards process, the cool thing of what browsers are doing is that the W3C has laid out a really, really strong roadmap for us with a key set of features. And if we have those, if we take into consideration those features, and we check for those features, we're guaranteeing ourselves that our site is future-proof. That's a very important and powerful statement. We can say we're going to check for features that the standards bodies have said this is what we're embracing, this is what we're pushing out, and based on those assumptions, we know what the browsers support. So if you check for something like an object, a method, a property, that's a big deal because now you're saying, all right, the W3C has said that add event listener is a standard. If I check for that, I know that this browser will support that. That's a big deal, as opposed to going to a browser which may have deprecated a feature. All right? Now, if you check for a specific feature, there's a couple of options. You can say, all right, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to offer a completely degraded experience. Or you may actually decide to load script in dynamically. And that's where polyfills and shims really become powerful. All right? And when you start seeing some of the functionality that's available within Polyfills and Shims, you're going to say, wow, this is really cool. We're going to talk about how you manage those expectations properly, because there's a responsibility to including somebody else's code to mimic standards API functionality. I don't want you guys to get bit on that, so we're going to talk about it a little bit later on. But, Ray, we're going to do just browser checking. That's OK. We can do that. And thankfully, Tony Ross, my peer over at Microsoft, had a great presentation. He showed this actual snippet, which I truly love. I truly love because it does demonstrate what the bad side of browser detection is. And here we're saying, hey, if this is a browser that's not Microsoft, let's go ahead and use the W3C standard add event listener method to an event. Pretty straightforward. But if it's a Microsoft browser, let's go ahead and use attach event. Maybe that would have been fine in a non-modern browser. But Internet Explorer 9 is pretty up to date. Who thinks Internet Explorer 9 is pretty up to date right now? The majority of you guys. Hopefully. Come on, guys. All right? Look, add event listener I know is in there, OK? All right? I know it's in there, OK? Come on. Work with me here. All right? Now, but in this scenario, if we did this, we're basing our code on false assumptions. We're assuming that all versions of Internet Explorer don't support add event listener. That's a bad assumption. OK? In fact, let's go back to this code. What happens if Microsoft down the road decides that, hey, I want to deprecate attach event? Your code breaks. This is a failed assumption. And let me show you. Let's go back to my machine, my laptop, so I can do some scripting. So let me bring up Visual Studio. And here's a simple script. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm checking to see if it's not a Microsoft browser. And if it's not a Microsoft browser, I want to go ahead and use the W3C standard add event listener method. Pretty straightforward. Otherwise, I want to do attach event. So if I go to my browser, and I'll bring up my feature detection demo. Come on. It comes up. Let me close this down. And I just have a big click me. Now, considering that code, if it's not a Microsoft browser, then it should use attach event. And Internet Explorer uses add event listener. All right? This is a failed assumption. This should be using add event listener. We should be testing on features because this is supported. Here we're using an old proprietary method. We don't want that. All right? This is incorrect. All right? And this is the same thing that happens if I go here to an old version of Internet Explorer. Attach event. All right? IE9 supports add event listener. Why would we go ahead and make an assumption that it doesn't? That's a failed assumption. All right? The right way of doing this, can we go back to slides? Is like this. This is feature detection. This is the way it should be done. We should be checking for a standard method. We're saying if window.add event listener exists, then let's go ahead and use add event listener. This is the right way of doing it because IE9 supports it in this case. And we want to make sure that we focus on standards as opposed to proprietary stuff. So if I go back to my code now, and I change this around, and yeah, I'm cheating a little bit because I got some commented code in here. Get this out, save, and now I refresh. And let me go back to the code. Again, no smoke and mirrors, OK? All right, I know this is tough code, guys. All right. So we're just checking to see if add event listener exists. And then if I click here, now in IE7 mode, attach event, we expect that. Non-modern browser, perfect. I'll go back here. And now I click it, and add event listener was used. All right, this is the better way of doing it. By the way, does everybody know that Internet Explorer 9 now has this ability to change browser modes? Who knew about this? All right, still a lot of people that don't know that Internet Explorer 9. And if you're using Internet Explorer 9, this has the ability to let you test in different browser modes. So please use this. That way you can verify your applications against this. I know this was kind of tough in the past. But, the Internet Explorer browser developer team, the tools team, really made a great effort to make this simple. So please take advantage of this. All right, can we go back to slides? But what happens when feature detection looks like this? Yeah, the monkey freaks. Look at that. No, you know, I would freak out if I had to write this. I'd probably look like him. All right, my hair, okay. So, and this is a check for @fontface. Imagine if you had to write this. All right, you'd probably kill yourself. You know, it's horrible. Look at that. But, you know, the cool thing is, for feature detection, I'm going to thank a really good friend of mine. His name is Paul Irish, because he has really pushed forward a library called Modernizer. All right, and Modernizer is really the best option right now for feature detection. Is what I know that I push. I know a lot of people within Microsoft push it. I know people with Google and Mozilla all push Modernizer because it has the most complete breadth of HTML5 and CSS3 feature detection capability. So if we go back to the browser, and I'm sorry for making you guys jump back and forth, I'll take you here, and what I love is to show this screen off. This is the Modernizer website, and if you're into HTML5 and CSS3 and you really want to check it out and you want to make sure you have good feature detection, this is it. The important part about this library is it abstracts a lot of the complexities of understanding what these features are about and how to actually check for them in the right way across all browsers. So instead of having to have all this conditional logic and say, all right, what am I looking for and how am I going to find it within specific versions, I can go ahead and here and say, I want to search for all these HTML5 features. I want to search for these CSS3 features, and the syntax is incredibly simple. Let's go back to the slide so I can show you the actual syntax itself. So before I do that, just to point out, so it does detect all major HTML5 and CSS3 features. Lots of great sites are using it, including Twitter, the National Football League, Burger King. So it is really supported well, and there's a lot of backing behind it. So really cool so far. So if I want to test for @fontface, I can do this. That's great. You know what? I don't want to write that much. I really don't. All right? Because that happens. All right? I want to do this. This is easy. So think about it, guys. Do you want to do this, or do you want to be that monkey? Which one do you want to be? Who wants to be the monkey? I knew it. That one guy who doesn't have to check for anything always wants to be the monkey. Knew it. All right. So I prefer doing this. All right. I don't want to be the monkey. I want to check that out. So let's go back to my computer and let's do a quick demo. So I'll go here into Visual Studio, and I'm going to go into Modernizer, my Modernizer.html page. Notice that it's just a JavaScript file. I'm actually loading it up. Here it is, standard script tag. And in here, basically what I'm saying is, if Canvas is supported within my browser, as well as audio support, HTML5 audio support, then I want to go ahead and spark up a nice little Canvas, like a little Canvas demo. It's going to be actually pretty cool. It's going to be, I'm going to do a little dancing for you guys and everything. All right. Otherwise, we're going to load something else that's, maybe we're going to offer a degraded experience for our user. All right. Pretty straightforward, but let's look at the syntax. If modernizer.canvas. That's simple. We're checking for a feature. It's modernizer.canvas. Think about that. If modernizer.audio. You can't get easier than that. I go to my demo here. Go here. All right, and I'll run this. All right. I'll crank it up. Yeah. Yeah, baby. Yeah. All right, come on. Who wants to dance with me? Come on. All right. All right. So really cool. Nice audio. This is HTML5 audio. We're rendering Canvas here. So far, so good. But what happens if we're using a non-modern browser? All right. Well, if we're using a non-modern browser, we offer a degraded experience. All right. All right. Yeah, who's missed hamster dance? I know I did. I missed hamster dance, okay? All right, let me close this down. We can go back to the slides, please. I love hamster dance. God, I missed it so much. That kind of leads us into polyfills and shims. And so, it's funny. I've always used this term polyfill, and I've used the term shim. And in my slides, I started thinking about it today. I was like, I've never really looked to see what polyfill is. I kind of had an idea, but I never really looked at it. And so I looked it up, and there it is. If you've ever used anything to fill in a crack, whether it's, they call it polyfix in this one, or they might call it some stucco paste or whatever, that's what polyfill is. It's a paste that's used to fill in a crack. Okay? And if you've never seen shims, well, that's a shim right there. And, Wikipedia had a really great explanation of what a shim is. A shim is a thin and often tapered or wedge piece of material used to fill small gaps or spaces between objects. And I looked at this and I said, God, that is such a great explanation to what polyfills and shims do right now. Basically, they help fill in those gaps where HTML5 is missing in non-modern browsers. All right? And I'm going to tell you what the differences are between polyfills and shims. So basically, they're specially crafted JavaScript, HTML, and CSS that provide you with kind of the functionality that the standards do when a browser doesn't support it. It's really, really cool. There's a lot of stuff out there, but there's a level of responsibility in using polyfills and shims, and we're going to talk about that. Now, the main difference between the two is that when you use a polyfill, it's actually replicating what the W3C standard API looks like. That's a very important thing to remember, because the shim, on the other hand, will provide you with functionality that's very similar to what the standard provides, but it may have a totally different API, and that has a dramatic impact on the ability to maintain your code going forward. If your API is not the same, that means that you might have to go back and rewrite code later on if you want to leverage a standards feature. Something to think about. All right? There's a massive list of polyfills that's being supported by the Modernizer team. It's a great one. If we can shift over to the browser, to my laptop for a second. And bear with me 1 second. Oh, shoot. Oh. Sorry, guys, I didn't have it up here. I should have had it. Polyfill. Modernizer. All right. So there's a fantastic list of polyfills and shims that provide everything from SVG support to Canvas, web storage. You name it, it's pretty much here. Here's audio, web SQL database, web forms, web sockets. It's all there. And there's a lot of great code in here. All right? There's a lot of really good code. Let's go back to the slides. There's a lot of great code and a lot of tried and tested polyfills and shims, like HTML5 shim. You have H5F for forms capability. But there's something that you need to think about. When you use a third-party library, you're basically assuming the responsibility of managing that library. Think about this. Has anybody ever used a library where the developer decided they didn't want to support it anymore? Who's used a library in their application where the developer just abandoned the project? OK, a good number of you. Well, think about the fact that if you're using a shim, well, a shim is basically a library. And if you decide to use it, you're assuming responsibility for that, in an indirect way at least to start off with. If that developer decides they don't want to support it anymore, that's up to you now. The other part is you have to make sure of the browser support level. You have to make sure that it is cross-browser, that it's going to work as expected. You want to make sure that under the hood that code is solid because it has to function as you expect. Your app needs to be maintainable and scalable. So, and in addition, you want to make sure that the API is consistent with what your long-term goals are. If you want to focus on standards and you want your app to be able to take advantage of the features that W3C is providing, then you want to look for polyfills that will actually support the API very closely to almost 100%. In fact, I'll give you an example. Socket.io, which is a great library for providing socket capability, recently revamped their whole entire library to mimic the W3C standard WebSocket API. They did that so that non-modern browsers can leverage and have that WebSocket-like functionality. And so when those browsers actually upgrade to, let's say, a modern browser status, your code doesn't have to change for them. That's a big deal. Think about the fact that you have to rewrite your code now because you didn't think about that ahead of time. It's a resource issue, it's a cost issue, and things that you want to consider when you're leveraging this. So let's talk about a polyfill. In this case, most everybody's probably done something like this. This is a pretty standard HTML web page. We have a div at the very top, a div for nav, sidebars, article. Pretty straightforward stuff. All right? This is the way we do development nowadays. But for HTML5, we have some new tags that actually provide more meaning, actually more thoughtful meaning to a page. And hopefully when browsers actually start leveraging this more, they're actually going to be able to react on what these new tags will do. So we have tags like nav, article, section, which are really important in segmenting out code and actually offering meaning to the page. You might be saying, well, Ray, this gives me meaning. Yeah, it gives you meaning because you're actually writing in the word header. But what if I just put the word head, or I put in the word Rey, or I put in the word object? Does that mean anything? But something like this might. And so, and I'm not going to dwell on this. I mean, I'm just giving you my feedback. But this is what an HTML5 centric page would look like, where you're going to have the header tag, you're going to have nav, aside. But there's an issue with this. It's browser support. And what ends up happening is in non-modern browsers, there are issues in terms of what the internal style sheets support. There are issues in terms of what elements are actually supported by the browser itself. And we're kind of guilty about this. We're kind of guilty about this with Internet Explorer and some of the non-modern versions of it, like IE6, where it doesn't understand these new semantic elements and can't parse them and render them the right way. So if you look at what I've shown here, here's the image on the right is what I'd like for it to appear like. But the one on the left is actually what ends up happening when I'm in a non-modern browser. It kind of looks hokey. All right, so let me show you why. So if I go to Visual Studio, let me close this down because we don't need these. All right, in Visual Studio, I've created a standard page. We've got a header, we've got nav, section, there's an article tag. Pretty straightforward stuff. This is what an HTML5 page would typically look like and be formatted. So if I run this now, let me make sure I'm in IE9 mode. Yep. And I bring this up. So I'm using border radius. We saw the code. So I got border radius for rounded corners because all the cool kids are doing rounded corners. Yeah. So, and I'm using the article tag and things like that. And yeah, it's not a fancy blog, guys, but it gets the point across. But let's see what happens when a non-modern browser hits this. Boom, all out of whack. And the reason is because there's a parsing error in older versions of Internet Explorer. And what happens is it can't render the semantic tags out. It doesn't recognize them at all. So that becomes a bit of a problem. Well, John Resig, the creator of jQuery, actually he came up with something pretty cool. He created basically a shim that would allow you to create these elements on the fly. By using the standard create element method, he can create the elements, and then Internet Explorer magically recognizes it. So then Remy Sharp took it a step further, and he actually created a full-blown shim that will do this for you. It actually goes out and creates all these new tags when you load the JavaScript file at the very top of the page. So if we look at his code, you'll see what I'm talking about. And it's compressed, and I couldn't find a good uncompressed version. But the bottom line is, here's create element. And then what he's doing is he's going through, and he's looking through a list of the HTML5 semantic tags, and he's creating them on the fly. By doing that, Internet Explorer recognizes it. You're creating the element, you're injecting it into the DOM, and Internet Explorer now has those available. So the cool thing, and to take it even a step further, and Paul, I love you for this one, is Paul Irish and the Modernizer team actually inserted this shim into Modernizer. So guess what? You're doing feature detection using Modernizer. Well, now it actually will create these elements for you, which is really cool. You kill two birds with one stone. You create these elements on the fly, so that Internet Explorer 6 through 8 can recognize them. And then on top of that, you get awesome feature detection. Very cool. So if we go here, and now let me close this down. I'll go here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to uncomment this line. This is just Modernizer. Now, you figure that if I uncomment this line, those new elements should be recognized now. So if I go here and I refresh, kind of. The problem is that the internal style sheet that would normally recognize these elements isn't there in this browser. All right? Every browser has an internal style sheet that says, hey, a div is a block level element, or whatever format it is for specific elements. Every browser has that. Well, non-modern browsers like Internet Explorer 6 or 7 don't have that. They don't recognize that. So we have to style that. And that's one of the cool things that somebody else came up with, a solution. It's an HTML5 reset. So we've used resets in the past to kind of help us create baseline functionality for our CSS files. Now we have a reset file for our HTML5 elements, which kind of resets everything to baseline and gives us the expected functionality. So if I go here, and I include my reset, and I can show you what the reset looks like. Basically, all it's doing is saying, hey, Let's go ahead and let's do display block, for example, for all article size details. It's just assigning base styles, kind of like what the internal style sheet would do. That's all it's doing. So now if I go back to my demo and I do Control R, bam. Now we're looking much better. And you know, remember what I mentioned before, you can offer a degraded experience to your users. You don't have to say every user is going to have the same exact experience. You don't have to say that a user that uses Internet Explorer 9, a user that uses Internet Explorer 6 is going to have the same experience that a user with Internet Explorer 9 will have. That's perfectly fine. You can offer that degraded experience. Now, me being an anally retentive programmer, no, I want to do something different. So what I've done is I've gone down here, and I'm going to load up jQuery. Let me comment this. And if we look at the code, it's just basically saying, hey, if border radius is not there, this browser doesn't support border radius, and I'm using, of course, Shiny Modernizer. All right, I'm going to use jQuery's getScript method to dynamically load in this jQuery plugin that's going to offer me rounded corners functionality, and I'm going to provide rounded corners. This is what you would call a shim. And this will provide, this is kind of a great example of where polyfills and shims help fill some of these gaps. So now, if I run this, Control R, bam, rounded corners. All right, this is pretty cool. This is the power of polyfills and shims. They help bridge that gap. They help mimic that functionality. All right, let's go back to the slides. Now, we can also degrade gracefully. One of the greatest features of HTML5, in my opinion, is the video tag. It's awesome. You know, the fact that you can work within the context of a browser, not have to worry about an external plugin in there, that's really, really hot. That's great. Less issues with stability, less issues with resources. It's all included into the browser. It's awesome. And this is kind of what you would have to do before. All right? This is a Silverlight plugin. All right? Vicious code. If we look at it now, much better. This makes me much happier. Very simple, very straightforward code. In this case, we're loading a video that's encoded in H.264. Pretty straightforward. The problem comes in with codec support. You have a couple different codecs out there, and different browser vendors support different versions. So for example, we look at it, well, we have Internet Explorer, which supports H.264. And if WebM is actually installed on the machine, it will support WebM. And it'll run a WebM encoded video file. We have Firefox, which supports OGG and WebM, but doesn't support H.264. Then we have Safari, which supports H.264 and nothing else. Google Chrome, which currently does support H.264, but they've announced that they're going to drop support for that, so that's why I'm not putting it in there. All right? So you can see that we have this disparity of codec support. It's kind of a pain sometimes, you know? It makes development a lot harder. So one of the cool things, and you know, W3C, I love you guys for this. You guys were smart, very, very smart for this. You guys offered a way to do kind of like I'm going to call it like a waterfall approach, basically, where you can specify multiple different types of codecs within the video tag, and it'll render accordingly. So for example, in this case, let's look at the code. The code says source video.mp4, MP4. That's an H.264 video. Just by looking, I can tell. Now, assuming my browser doesn't support H.264 video, it's going to continue on, and it's going to say, all right, let's see if the video supports OGG, the OGG Theora format. If it does, great, it'll render it. Otherwise, it's going to keep trickling down, and it'll go down to WebM. That's pretty cool. This is a nice, graceful way of degrading down and making sure that there's a broad level of support for different codecs. But what about browser support? Well, what about browsers that don't support the video tag? This is the cool thing. You can actually embed a more traditional plugin-based type of code in there to actually render it out. And it can be Flash, it can be Silverlight, or whatever you want. So not only do we have the support for multiple HTML5 videos encoded in different types of codecs, but we can also fall back to more traditional Flash or Silverlight-based plugins encoded videos. Pretty cool. So let's look at the code real quick. So now, in here, what I'm doing is basically I'm coming down, and what I want to do is I want to run this video. This video is called the Big Buck Bunny video. Who's seen Big Buck Bunny? All right, only a few of you. All right? He is the cutest bunny in the world. I love him. And you're going to sit there and you're going to watch the movie because I said so and I love him. Sorry, I get a little passionate. All right, but we're going to actually run this out. So if I go here into Internet Explorer and I bring up my HTML5 video, boom. Would it come up? Oh, let me see, am I in the right rendering? Oh, sorry. See? At least you know it's not smoke and mirrors, okay? Internet Explorer 9. There we go. So now, if we look, we have controls. Looks good. This, I have to say, this looks more like a Flash or Silverlight type of player. But if I right mouse click on it, I don't have anything else that says Silverlight or Flash. That's because it's just a standard HTML5 player. Very cool. And if I run this, oh, there we go. If you haven't seen the video, I'll let it run a little bit. All right, and then we're going to all hug because the bunny's so cute. Now we get a little bird. There you go. I little cutie birdie. He's cute. Come on. Come on. You guys, you know you love him. I don't care what you say. And here comes Buck. And he is a big bunny. You'll see. Here he comes. Is that not the, is he not cute? Look at that. Is that not like the cutest little chubby bunny? You just want to grab him and hug him and take him home with you? Sorry. I get so distracted on this. He's like cute. Look at that. No, I'd like to bring him home. Like my daughter would like, I don't know, wrestle with him or something, you know? It's incredible. Now, but if I go over here to Firefox and I click on the same exact page, look what I get. I get a box with an X in it. And the reason is because Firefox doesn't support H.264. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust our code just a little bit. I'm going to go back to my code. And what I want to do is I want to run a WebM encoded version. Now, Firefox, I know, will run WebM. So if I refresh this, there we go. Now Firefox can support this, and you can actually run it. OK? Who wants to see it again? Oh, sorry. All right. And then you can keep going forward, and you can say, all right, I want to also support OGG. All right? But I still have the problem here on a non-modern browser. So if I go here, and I press F12, and I change over to browse in IE7 mode, boom, nothing happens. That's kind of flaky. You know, I want my users to have at least a similar level of an experience. So I can go back to my code here, and I'm going to do a fallback. Now, the cool thing is that YouTube has this video online. So I've gone ahead and grabbed the code for YouTube, and it's going to render in a Flash-based version. So now if I run this, hopefully the internet works. Oh, what did I do here? Oh, sorry. There we go. Now I can run it and provide a very similar experience, but in this case, running an actual plugin-based scenario. So as you can see, we've gone ahead and we started with the HTML video tag, and we've actually degraded down very easily and supported multiple codecs, and even gone to the level of supporting users who don't support HTML5 video natively. Pretty cool, right? All right. All right, let's go back to the slides. So the main thing I want to make sure that you guys take away today is that HTML5 offers you a ton of functionality, but we still have millions and millions of users who can't use HTML5 today. And we should never just assume that we shouldn't support them. They depend on our services. And to be honest, some of you guys depend on their money because it funds your efforts. So we need to, it's kind of a balancing act. We want to make sure that we take care of our users in some fashion. And so there's a couple ways of doing it. Obviously, feature detection. You want to make sure that you always check for standards. Makes sense. You use Modernizer if you want to. Modernizer is a great library. I definitely highly recommend it. And when you use polyfills, guys, the main thing I want to stress to you is use them with care. Don't assume that you're going to inject a library into your code and everything's going to be all unicorns and pixel dust and stuff like that. All right, there's responsibility. All right, you want to make sure that you have the capability, the skill level, to support the code that you're injecting into your site. Because if something happens, the ultimate responsibility falls on your shoulders. So you want to make sure you take care of that. Lastly, I'm always going to push you guys into using polyfills. Remember that they mimic the standards-based API, and that's what you want. Shims are like a last resort. If you have no other choice, use a shim. But just think ahead of time that you might have to change that code later on. That's a very important factor. All right? And with that, thank you very much for listening to me, and I appreciate your time. All right, so I guess we'll take some questions.
Hi, my name is Naveen. Thanks for the presentation. It's
My
very
pleasure.
interesting. And I'm wondering, have you found the most efficient way of taking a high-res video and then transcoding it into H.264, OGG, and WebM?
There are some services that can provide that for you. God, I can't remember the name of the service right off the top of top of my head. I'm sorry? Wowza. What's it called? Wowza. I think I've heard of Wowza, but there was another company that actually would do that for you, where you say, "Here's my video. It might be H.264, WebM, whatever you want," and they'll handle the encoding for you. You put it up there, and it's a third-party service. What's that? Archive.org. Archive.org. Thank you. Question? All right. Well, thank you again, guys. I really appreciate it. You guys have been fantastic. I'll let you guys be.